Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and this is the Not So Serious Keto interview series where my guest today, I am thrilled to announce, is Carolyn Ketchum from All Day I Dream About Food. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you for having me. It's fun. I
And
like that we're not so serious.
we're not so serious. I've mentioned this in the past. If there was something I could go back and change, I would have picked a different channel name and different URL because I think it misleads a lot of people to think that perhaps I'm too serious about keto or that I'm dogmatic or whatever.
Right.
But I do own about 20 to 30 different keto related URLs just in case I ever decide to change the name. I'm set. But the first thing I want to do, since this is not about me, the first thing I want to do is congratulate you on passing the 100,000 YouTube subscriber milestone.
Yeah.
Have you gotten your plaque yet?
I did. It's funny, I don't work very hard at YouTube. I mean, definitely the focus is my blog and my cookbooks,
Mhm.
but I started doing it for fun and they were really fun. And a couple of them have really taken off. I don't know. I know people really try to break down the YouTube algorithm and figure out what's going on. And I just have too many other little algorithms I'm trying to figure out. So that one I tend to just, if I feel like making a recipe or a video for this, I'll
Mhm.
do it. And sometimes it brings me back to recipes that I haven't done in a while, which is really, really fun.
Yeah, the Instagram or not Instagram, YouTube algorithm, you can really go down a rabbit hole looking at analytics. I know some content creators do. My system is basically if I think a video is going to do poorly, it generally does well, and vice versa. It's sort of the George Costanza approach of YouTube content creation.
That's a good way to do it. And sometimes it's just I want the Google juice from the YouTube video back to the blog because, then it connects the two and it says, oh, yes, this person's doing more than just writing about a recipe. So that helps too. But sometimes it doesn't help at all.
So you had mentioned cookbooks, and that's where I want to go first because I
Okay.
have right here, and I don't know if my screen is going to be mirrored or if it's going to look regular once I actually release it. But if you can't read backwards, this is keto baking. And
Yeah.
this, I've got to, well, first let me ask, are you like a big fan of cookbooks or a cookbook collector?
I used to be. I also used to be like a cooking magazine collector. But now it's hard to have time to read them because I'm making my own stuff.
Mhm.
So I don't, people send me cookbooks all the time and I don't ever use them and I feel bad. Occasionally I use them, I get an idea. But it's just hard because I'm just concentrated on making my own. But I used to collect Gourmet and which is now defunct and Bon Appetit
Mhm.
and Cooks Illustrated and we had huge collections. And I've always loved reading about recipes, always. Now I often am doing it online, but it's the same, pretty much the same thing.
So I probably have around 200 cookbooks. I love them. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
uh, reading a recipe is almost like reading a short story,
Yeah.
and I enjoy it a lot. I don't have a lot of keto cookbooks because I find that in general, most keto cookbooks are not all that good. They're boring. They're they seem very quickly thrown together. Yours is not that. In fact, I would call your book, the one that I just held up, The Ultimate Guide to Keto
The ultimate
Baking,
guide to keto baking.
not just the best keto cookbook I've ever seen. It is a amazing cookbook, full stop. It
Thank you.
really does all the things that I look for in a cookbook. So, which brings me to my question, which is, are there certain criteria that you had when you were creating the cookbook in order for it to meet your standards and just so happen as it so happens coincidentally my standards as well?
Yes. So I, being a devotee of America's Test Kitchen and Cooks Illustrated, which we still get and I still look at, mostly for just, I mean, they do this thing of testing out different techniques and saying
Mhm.
which one works better. And often I go, oh, too many steps. But
I
that's
gotta
how I
check.
wanted.
I
It
gotta
was
quick check hit mute here,
oh,
or go into a sleep mode or something like that because otherwise, yeah, I don't want you getting interrupted by my phone. Sorry about that.
no
So
worries.
yeah, I'm
No.
a fellow ATK fan here, but please continue.
Yeah, it's the idea of the science behind it that
Mhm.
I really wanted to dig into. So I tried out every sweetener I could get my hands on, except the really fakey fake stuff like sucralose. I tried out every flour I could think of, including lupin flour, which I don't use on a regular basis. And I just wanted to teach people, like it's the educator in me a little, but I wanted to teach them why you do certain things, because I get questions all the time on my blog or on a cookbook that says, why did you do this? Or I did this, and but I subbed, people think
Mhm.
every keto sweetener is the same, and they don't work the same. They behave very differently. So if you're going to sub allulose where I use erythritol, you're going to find your cookies are soft and chewy
Mhm.
rather than crisp. They're supposed to be crisp, and so it's really about understanding how things work and why, which is how I've always approached baking, even before I was keto. So I love the science behind it. And that was my swan song. I don't mean that I may write more cookbooks, but at this point I put everything into that. I worked really hard to make it, kind of an America's Test Kitchen kind of thing of
Mhm.
explaining why you do certain things. So I'm not keen on writing another one anytime soon.
So I describe cookbooks. There are recipe books, which is just here. I just threw together a bunch of
Right,
recipes.
right,
And then there are what I call cooking books,
right. Reference books.
which are, and this is both of those things. It is exactly what you described. It is a very comprehensive collection of keto baking recipes, but also, I mean, just it starts. I hearken back to the book Gear for Your Kitchen by Elton Brown.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what about the first. Oh my goodness.
The front matter, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah, there's
it.
up to yeah, the first three chapters
Yeah,
of this are almost like um, Good Eats keto version.
right, right.
And I love that. The other thing that is a big draw for me on cookbooks as a former continuous improvement process excellence guy is I like um, visual work instructions. So
Hmm.
everything has a picture.
Right.
And you it's to me when I opened up this cookbook, I think it may have been at Costco that I saw it. I was like,
Mm,
pictures, pictures, pictures. I love
yeah.
this. So that was a big thing to me. But then from a process standpoint, you check all the boxes from prep time, active time, cooking time.
Yeah.
You list the ingredients in the order that they're going to be used. So
Mhm.
visually
Yes.
scanning, you've got the macros, it. So I guess what I'm saying to those of you are my viewers, and who else would be watching really?
Maybe
If
my viewers will be watching.
I hope so. Well, they
Yeah,
should already have your cookbook, but if you don't, I will include a link to it down in the description below. It is fantastic.
thank you.
This though does bring me to my next question. You said that this
Okay.
is sort of your swan song. This came out in 2019,
Mhm.
and there have been a lot of changes to keto baking. A
I
lot
would
of
like to do an updated one, like a second edition.
what do you consider to be the biggest changes that you've seen in the last few years to keto baking?
White chocolate, which just came out like, a month before this went to print, which drove me crazy because I was like, I had to fake the white chocolate with the cocoa butter and some
Mm,
vanilla, and I was like, "Okay, now we have this stuff in it." And now I don't have to kind of, because cocoa butter never quite tastes the same as white chocolate. And then the sweeteners have definitely changed. The availability of something like allulose, which I wasn't using a lot then because the first couple times I used it, it really upset my stomach. But
mm,
then I just somehow either I built a tolerance or the brands were better. Not really sure. But I've come to really like it when I want something soft and creamy, not crisp.
mhm.
Um, and it's become much more available, widely available to almost everybody. I'm trying to think. I don't generally use, I know a lot of people really like Vital Wheat Gluten. I don't generally use that. But I'm not against it if it works for what you're doing. But all my cookbooks and almost all my recipes are completely gluten free too. So, and it's just how I started low carb. But I'm not saying you have to do anything any particular way. So I might maybe test it out to give people the option. If I was going to rewrite the cookbook or do a second edition, I might test that.
Have you done much playing around with the various egg white breads?
I haven't. Well, in a way, I have because um, in that book there is a chiffon cake, and it's made with whole eggs, but you separate them and you whip the egg whites to get it to rise beautifully. It's kind of like angel food cake, except without with the yolks as well. And I then created a bread based on that. I haven't really fell completely in love with it, so I'm not ready to. I've used it in a couple of other recipes on my blog, but no, those are really, really popular. And also, part of my problem is it was developed by somebody else, and I don't want to try to piggyback on their work. And that's kind of my thing, you know.
Well, and I often get requests from people, "Well, can you do a recipe on this or that baked good?"
Right,
And I say, Why? Why should I when there's already a handful of people out there like you, Indigo Neely, uh,
right.
Upgrade that, that have done some, great things." It's just, to me, it's far easier just to say, "Go watch those folks. They've got this
Yeah,
down."
yeah.
And,
Yeah,
I'm
people
gonna
keep asking me for the what is it, PSMF bread?
yeah, yeah,
And
the
I'm just
protein
I'm
frame
like,
up, yeah.
this was developed by Maria. I don't
Yep.
wanna, like, grandstand on her kind of thing. I've been playing around with baking with collagen, and I'm close to a bread recipe. Oh, I had a bit of a fail yesterday, though. I was like, "Ooh." It it didn't even taste good. I rarely throw anything completely away, and I had to throw that one away. But, because it gives sort of a first of all, it's great protein, great source of
Mhm.
protein, but it also gives a chewiness that I'm working toward creating a bread recipe based on that. I have a couple of muffin recipes already with it, but I'm working with it a lot.
Is there you mentioned the failure yesterday. Is there
Yeah.
been a or has there been a recipe that you've just worked and worked and worked and just hit a point where you kind of throw up your hands and say, "I don't think this can be done," or at least I can't do it, or I can't get it up to my standards.
Yes, choux pastry. You can't do that without gluten. You can't get flaky like croissants
Mm,
or like crullers or, you know, the really it's or eclairs. You can't get that. We can fake them. We can fake them a lot of the time with like whipped egg whites, and but
mm,
you can't get that thing with you can't get it with coconut flour or almond flour. You just can't. You can't get the
yeah.
flakiness. And so I'm not really willing to commit to doing anything non-gluten free on my blog. I do a couple things on social media because I'm playing with stuff and people ask me to, but I'm just and so you really can't do that with like coconut flour, and so I have given up. I have tried. I've gotten some big failures on that one.
Yeah, for me, if somebody could do puff pastry, and that sort of falls in
Exactly.
the same
Yeah, that's like
category,
choux pastry. Yeah.
to be able to do beef Wellington. That was,
Oh
pre-keto,
yeah.
that was the big family request for any holiday was beef Wellington.
Yeah.
And it's just you can't any sort of substitute that I've seen anyone try and do for puff pastry tends to be very fathead,
Yeah, and then
and
it's what
it's
it
just
is dense. I mean,
yeah,
it's
it's so
delicious.
heavy, but yeah, it's a different thing than
Right,
what you're shooting for.
right. It's not the light, flaky stuff, and I have a recipe for almond croissants, and they're just little, fathead dough almond croissants, and they're delicious. They're not what I remember eating, they're dense. I mean, they're delicious, but they don't have that light, flaky crust.
So in your book, you talked about transitioning to keto and keto baking. So
Mhm.
you were a big baking enthusiast pre-keto and then found out you had type 2 diabetes. Is that
Well, I
correct?
had
Or that you were
gestational
getting
diabetes with my third child, and then it didn't really resolve. I still have blood sugar issues. So because I went low carb really quickly, I would be listed as pre-diabetic, not I'm in the pre-diabetic range, not type 2, because it's probably a good thing to not be fully diagnosed with that and have to go through the insurance issues that come with it. So it's pre-diabetes, but I call it type 2 essentially, or I think of it as type 2 because it's just a spectrum. So
I was not as big a baker as you were or still are. But I used to do a lot of, homemade breads and things
mhm.
like that, pre-keto, and found that once I went keto and started trying to bake, nothing I knew about baking was applicable anymore. What advice would
Nothing.
would if you could go back in time and give Carolyn a couple bits of advice when she was first starting keto baking to help her avoid frustration, what would those things be?
Yeah, I say this all the time, throw your expectations out the door. Like, first of all, if you think that ground almonds are going to work the same way that wheat flour does, and you just sub almond flour for wheat flour, you're going to get a brick. Same with coconut flour is really deceptive because it's got the same light powderiness as
Mhm.
wheat flour, but it absorbs so much moisture. And if you don't put a zillion eggs in, it's a brick. So it's, and yeah, you can't, people say to me all the time, this recipe didn't work. And I'm an experienced baker. I've been baking all my life. And I'm like, but you haven't been keto baking. And that's completely different. And so I had to do that. I had to throw out, but now what's funny is if you gave me flour and sugar and told me to bake cookies, I'd have zero clue how to do it because I don't use those ingredients anymore and they behave completely differently.
So you mentioned your 3rd child. Or is that
Yes.
is that where you stopped with 3, or is there
Yes.
more?
No, I'm too old for more.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got 3 and they're all in their teens, and it's a really fun experience. How about you?
Well, I've got a son who's 22, a daughter who's 21, and a grandson who's 3.5.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So, uh, you know, things a lot of things didn't play out exactly as I was expecting, but it all worked out.
right.
Um, the reason I ask is none of my family is keto. Any of your family keto, or do they just kind of come along for the ride, or are you the only one that eats what you make?
Okay, so we used to it was now I've got teenagers, and they're distinctly different than younger children. And we went through I used to be able to make muffins, and the kids would just grab them and, "Yeah, these are great, these are great." I'm now struggling with I mean, particularly my son wants to eat. He's basically rebelling, and it's not like I'm forcing it on him, but he has no desire to eat what I make and
Mm.
turns up his nose at it. He used to. There were muffins that he used to say to me, "Make these again, make these again." And this is only like 3 or 4 years ago that he used to do it. And now he just won't. He won't touch it. He's really sort of, his own thing. The girls will sometimes eat what I make. My middle kid will often eat what I make. And when it's dinner, sure, it's just dinner. But this is, the baked goods and things. So I took a whole bunch of sugar cookie bars to my CrossFit gym this morning. They were happy about them. So,
So I want to come back to social media for a
ugh,
second.
yeah,
You had talked about how you don't do as much on YouTube.
right.
I know you do a lot on Instagram because
Yep.
every day I see something new and delicious on Instagram, and it makes me wonder: are you actually putting out a recipe a day, or are you recycling some content? How do
I'm
you manage?
recycling content.
How
I'm
do you manage
absolutely
that?
recycling content. Yeah. I've been doing this for 12 years. So I have thousands of recipes in my archives, and sometimes I remake them for a video. Sometimes I'm taking old shots and I've gotten to like reels. At first I hated them. Change is hard. But I have gotten to like them. And sometimes you can just do them with photos. There's a bunch of sort of these tutorials on how to just cycle through the photos really quickly to the beat of a song, which
Mm.
works really well when you have photos that are, showing people how to make them. Um, but no, I am absolutely not putting out a recipe a day. And these days I'm reworking a lot of older content, going back and revisiting it because things have changed so much, trying new sweeteners sometimes, trying a little bit of a new approach. I learned something on somebody else's blog, not a keto blogger, about making cheesecake. And I tried it out in one of my cheesecakes and was like, wow, this is really good. She basically beat the cream cheese with nothing else for 2
Mm.
full minutes. And I was like, well, I'll try that. And the cheesecake was hands down the creamiest I've ever made. So now I'm like incorporating that into recipes. So it's fun to revisit the old stuff. And as I'm doing it now, I take quick hitting video, like even if it's just a fork digging into it,
Mm.
so.
Yeah, that's something I need to be more cognizant of. Just, very often when I'm, making a dinner or something like that, it's all about just like how quickly can I get this on the plate and then start filling my head hole with it. And I don't think
Yeah.
these are a lot of great opportunities just to
Yeah.
grab some B-roll,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you totally can. And I take a lot of, because I like the photography part, I take a lot of photos of every recipe. I probably have 50 of every single recipe. So there's lots to choose from. Some of it's not as good as it could be, and then I want to fix it. But yeah, and then I just turn my my regular camera, my Canon, to the video function, and I just
Mhm.
take, a hand digging into it. Or if I'm remaking something, I might like do a couple of bits of video of like an important step so you can kind of mention it in the reel. So,
So you mentioned your Canon camera, which I
yeah.
also use a Canon camera, so team Canon.
Yeah.
Um, is that your primary device for filming and photographing, taking photographs,
Photography.
photography,
Yeah,
photographing?
I have several Canon 6Ds. I bought the 5D and it unmanned me. I was like, I don't know how to use you. It was a little more complicated. So I probably have to get back to that one. We usually shoot, my husband helps me, and we usually shoot everything, but we're thinking of getting like a full, for the face on video, getting a proper video camera. So I might ask you because I love my Canons for photography, but they're good for video, but they're not as sharp or perfect as they could be, or as HD probably.
Yeah. I've got, an EOS Rebel SL2 that,
Mhm.
I've got a top-down, tripod, that
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
aim down when I'm doing the cutting board, and then I've got an SL3, which does me.
Right.
And most of the time, the food photography is actually just my iPhone.
Oh, good. That's good.
Um,
I'm not very good on my phone.
there are a lot, and we're probably going off a topic that people are going to be
Not
interested
as
in, but
interested in.
hey, whatever. Um, there are a lot of great content creator sort of channels out on YouTube that'll be like, hey, here's some settings you didn't know your iPhone can do. And you're like, wow,
That's a good
okay, that's
idea.
pretty sweet. And I just bought a gimbal
I
a
don't even know
few
what that
days ago.
is.
So it's one of those like steady cam things. Like it's a handle that you put your camera or phone on. And then, I mean, you can be moving it all over and you can either have it do object tracking or, like,
Oh.
like cool sort of smooth. My hands are going out of the way so no one can see it, but like panning down into
Yeah.
something like it's almost
Yeah.
like a drone. Um, you can do that inception effect, where
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like going down the hallway and it's spinning.
So
What
cool.
was the other one that this one does, it's got some processing software in it, so you can do, like, this vertigo effect, like, in, the movie Poltergeist, when the mom's in the hallway and all of a sudden
Ooh.
it's like the hall stretches way back behind her,
Ooh.
and I think
Wow.
some of these would be kinda cool eye candy for, the, like, food B-roll type stuff,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like the teaser when you're starting, so the problem is I find the older I get, the more technically inept I'm becoming. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, this is just way too hard for me to figure out.
Yeah.
I just want point and click.
Yeah, now that my husband works with me, I'm charging him with doing the reading up on, because he's so much more thorough than I am on these things. I'm thorough on the recipes, but not so much on the other stuff. I kind of and to research video cameras that are really good for YouTube videos. And we'll probably get a new tripod to keep it steady because I have several big tripods, but they're better for cameras. And yeah, just do that research and have something that we can have more permanently in place rather than me running back and getting my camera and setting it all up again and changing all the settings again. And
Well, the cool thing about buying all this equipment is, it's pre-tax dollars now since this is what we do for a living.
yeah, yeah.
Makes it
That's why
easier
I
to.
own so many cameras and so many lenses. It's part of the reason because I'm always waiting. This sounds really pessimistic, and I'm generally not, but I'm sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop some of the time where it's like, people pay me to bake? Really? And
Mhm.
like tell you about baking? That's kind of awesome. And so sometimes I'm like, well, I'll just buy if I have some money sort of tax money that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get hit and I need some more expenses because I tend to keep my expenses down anyway. I'll usually
Mhm.
buy a new camera and some more lenses. Plus, I love the photography. I love it. Like, I really enjoy learning that. I've spent a lot of my time learning about photography and making pretty pictures pretty.
Yeah, I would love to start getting more into that myself. I've bought a bunch of lenses. I buy a lot of equipment in the same way that I buy exercise equipment. I think that just purchasing it is gonna make the magic happen,
Yeah. Yep.
but it requires some work too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I need to read up on my 5D because it's supposed to be one of the best Canon cameras out there. And I'm like, I tried it a couple times. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is too complicated. I can't do it right now. So I need to spend some time on that.
Now, you had mentioned that your husband helps out. Has he helped out from the beginning, or have you just recently sort of enlisted him? You
Yeah.
hit, like, a certain
So
size and.
he is now my CFO because he's a lot of things. He's my helper he does my dishes. And he helps me with the videos. And he does a bunch of other things too. And part of that was because during the pandemic, actually about a week before everything shut down, he was about to give his notice to work anyway. He'd worked a long time in IT and just really wanted a break from this company. And he was going to come on board with me. And then we panicked because of the pandemic and he stayed for longer, about a year and a half longer. But his job, they got sold and they were wrapping up his position anyway. And we were like, this is perfect. So what it has done is, obviously our income took a hit, but we have more time with our kids. And, it's not just because I was the one home. It was always, if a kid needed picking up, I was the person because
Mm.
he was at a job, that was in an office. So, and further away. So it was often that. And now it's just, he's taken over a lot of that, which has taken a lot off of me. And I'm saying all this because he's somewhere in the other room
Uh,
and and he's
well, he'll
listening.
probably
So
watch this video too, so we'll say nice things. Yeah, if I had someone to just wash dishes for me, that would be huge.
it's
I
huge.
think.
That's You need a new dishwasher. That's why.
Oh yeah, well, there's that. But I think one of the things that would be interesting if all of us content creators just got together and shared pictures of what does our kitchen look like after we get done with a recipe.
I want to do that as a reel because I also want to show people my baking cupboard. And I don't just have a cupboard, I also have a downstairs pantry and a huge set of shelves on there. And I'm a baker when I'm not a mise en place baker. I'm not a put it away again right after you use it. I'm get everything out,
Yeah.
get it into the oven, and then clean up. But sometimes, particularly like say on a layer cake that has more, or something that's a little more complicated, it's like my kitchen exploded. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
ugly.
a lot of times it's just get it off of camera, you know?
Mhm.
So I'll get done and I'll have, like, my induction cooktop sitting on the floor, you
Yes,
know?
yes, I do the same thing. Sometimes I have my whole mixer down on the floor because I had to kind of bring it up for one part, put it back down.
Well, and then I don't know if you've ever had this happen, depending on what your tripod setup is like, where for me, the overhead tripod
Mhm.
actually goes in front of some drawers where I've got measuring cups and measuring spoons and things like that. And you hit a point, you're like,
I
oh,
didn't
I
get that
forgot
out.
to take
Yeah.
out. And then you're like, okay, can I tilt this just enough that I can open that drawer? And then you put it back, and then the camera angle is all off, and you're like, okay,
Yep.
continuity
Yep.
error.
That's why I started paying for video editing.
Mm,
This great guy that somebody else recommended, and so I was taking it took me so much time to edit because I'm just not proficient with something like Premiere Pro, and he does such a great job, and it's so much faster. And so if the angles are weird, he can fix them. If the light sometimes on my Canon camera, the light will just change and one clip will be like a little more yellow. He can
yep.
fix that, and everything comes together more smoothly. The only thing he can't fix, which I've gone out of focus a couple of times, and it's focusing on the wall behind me.
Mhm.
And one of my most precious recipes has a video where I'm like, "Ooh, can you cut in more of the beauty shots because I'm way out of focus in that video."
Yeah, I have actually created sort of like this standard work template. You think about when a pilot runs through his or her
Yeah.
checklist. That's sort of like my thing where if I skip any step, like go into menu, make sure the audio level is set right for my microphone.
Hmm.
Not that I need to change the audio level on my microphone, but it's a reminder to turn on my microphone. Because I don't know if you've ever done this before, you've recorded an
Yes.
entire video and you get down into the editor and you're like, oh no,
Yep.
the audio bar isn't moving.
Yep.
The other thing you
I've done
talked
that.
about the picture sort of changing. I got this device. I'll have to once we get off of
Okay.
this thing, tell you about it. That is designed to help set the custom white balance on your camera.
Mm-hmm.
It's this thing that you hold right in front of the lens, but you gotta switch the lens to manual focus.
Hmm.
Otherwise, because it's right on top of the lens,
Yeah.
and if you don't do that, you can have the lighting sort of seem to change almost like, "Oh, that looks a little bit yellow or
Yeah.
red," or
Yeah.
whatever, because it's using, auto white balance instead of custom. But
Right.
my problem is I'll forget that I had to switch it to manual focus to take that
And that's
picture, and then, yeah, microwave looks great. Me, pretty blurry, which
Yep.
maybe does look great. Maybe that's the beauty filter.
I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not. But it's an interesting YouTube's an interesting thing. I mean, I I don't want to get so focused on growing it that like if YouTube, I think YouTube is more your primary focus and it's
Mhm.
not mine. And because of that, I can get really caught up in things and go down a rabbit hole and just worry about it too much. And I just said, I want YouTube to be fun for me. So it's the recipes I want to make. It's not the recipes I feel like I have to make. Or I get really silly in my videos now because it lightens the mood for me. And then, and my husband's behind the camera going, but the editor always does something fun with them. So
I have enough trust issues that, I'm not ready to and money issues that I'm not ready to farm out my editing quite yet, but, that would be nice. That would definitely be
I,
nice to focus on the content.
at the beginning, I gave him such like lengthy, and then he was like, well, I just did this. And I was like, ooh, that really works. So then I don't even give him suggestions anymore. So,
So how long have you been keto?
well, I've been low carb since 2010. Um, wait, Maggie was more, yeah, 2010. And I think as I noticed better blood sugar control, I probably dropped into the keto range pretty or like within 3 or 4 years. But I didn't even know the name of it at that point. And then it started to kind of creep into my consciousness and occasionally I don't really test for ketones anymore because I kind of
Mhm.
know what I'm doing and I know what works for my body. So I really just test my blood sugar. But I did for a while and I was like, oh, I guess I'm doing a keto diet. And particularly when I connected with my book publisher, that's when I sort of formalized it and went, okay, I'm paying a lot more attention to this and not just being low carb. But I never was one to sit there and count every macro because I think that this is my theory. A lot of people are trading one food obsession for another when they get too focused on macros and like I can only have this many grams of protein
Mm.
or whatever because sitting there and counting all of those takes a lot of time and a bit of obsessiveness. And if you've always had an obsession with food, you're really just trading it for another thing. So be careful there. Food should, at the beginning, I can see tracking pretty carefully, but food should become intuitive at some point.
Well, and I'm sort of two thoughts on this. First, I think that there are certain people that they really like rules. You know,
Mhm, true.
they like to be able to follow, a specific pattern. And what happens, especially when they're new to keto, it seems like this obsession becomes far more dogmatic, I think, for new people
Yes.
because it's starting to work for them and they're following it and they, watch some other person on YouTube that says you got to do this and, they've just become, sort of zealous about it.
Mhm.
And I think that's then what leads to the accusation about keto being unsustainable and restrictive because
You're
these
not
people, they're
wrong.
like, well, yeah, I just can't do this anymore.
Right.
And they, they burn out and then they shift away from keto rather than saying, you know what, I've kind of gotten used to the way my body feels. I know when I'm eating the right things. I know when I'm
Right.
not. Let's turn food back into something that, isn't a job.
Right. I think you are absolutely on point there because I think in some ways I'm lucky that I just started with low carb. It wasn't like I followed anybody's rules. I just started dropping my carbs. And every time there was a sort of a sweet spot between, I don't know, 30 and 50 total carbs per day. I'm pretty active. So, with CrossFit and running and things. So that seemed to be the sweet spot for me. And then I discovered it was keto, and then was like, oh, okay. So for me, I also never got dogmatic about is a certain food keto. I'm going to tell you sugar's not keto, but I'm also going to tell you that you could, if your macros allow for it or your body allows for it, you can eat a little bit of apple in a dish that serves 12 and you're not going to be kicked out of ketosis. But then I get that's not keto. And I'm like,
Well,
maybe not for you.
I'm a big fan of Dr. Eric Westman, and he says there's no
Mhm.
such thing as a keto food.
Right.
Keto is a metabolic state. You're either in
Exactly.
ketosis or not. You could eat 20 grams of sugar and then nothing but ribeye and bacon for the rest of the day and probably stay in ketosis. But why would you want to?
Right.
You
And that
know,
sugar's not good for you anyway. And for me, I couldn't because that spike would go whoop way too high.
plus I'm a big believer in the saying the dose makes the poison.
Right.
So sometimes
Absolutely.
guess what? Hey, yeah, there's a little bit of cornstarch in your baking powder. Is
Right.
it gonna kill you? No. Is it gonna
Right.
knock you out of ketosis? No. It's almost immeasurable. You
Right.
know, so some of these
Exactly.
people get a little bit too hardcore, I think, in reading the labels and being sort of the ingredient police. But that brings me to my next question, which is periodically when I do some sort of a sweets or dessert type of
Mhm.
recipe, which isn't all that often, I will get accused from the people further down the keto extreme path that I am being an enabler. What I'm doing is I'm creating a gateway for people to go back to eating high carb by stimulating their sweet sensors or something like that. Do you ever get comments like that from people?
Oh, I get tons of, I mean, you just get people are nasty on social media and YouTube, which I consider social media part of social media. But the thing for me is that, and I think this is why I have so many followers who think similarly to me. For me, having always had a sweet tooth, having always loved dessert and baking, having those options keeps me on track.
Mm,
Doesn't knock me out. I do understand that some people may have triggers, food triggers, and if something sweet sends them spiraling, they got to stay away from them. I get that. But many readers have expressed this to me, and this was my discovery early on. Having sweet options that aren't made with sugar, that don't, blow my blood sugars out of the water, it actually keeps me on track. And for me also, and I think a lot of people experience this, blood sugar rises and then it drops and you think you need something else. And so you eat
mhm.
more sweets and you're going like this. And having kicked off, and now I'm pretty stable across the board, I don't get those cravings. I crave the sweet taste, but
Mm.
I also don't need to just kind of keep eating it. So,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because when I did those tests on bread, the supposed resistant, like if you freeze
Mhm.
bread, then toast it, and then, hey,
The
guess what? We eat
resistant
bread.
starches or whatever?
Yeah. Which you want to talk about getting nasty comments. I got them from both sides, on that. I had the people that thought I had a person accuse me of being an attempted murderer because I'm trying to trick diabetics into eating bread. I'm like, I
I've
don't
heard
think
that
that's
one before.
I don't
Yeah.
think that's where I was going with all of this.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what happened
Ooh.
is I hadn't felt hunger in a couple of
Mhm.
years,
Mhm.
where your stomach is growling and you're getting
Yeah.
hangry. I haven't had that. And
Uh-huh.
then after 5 days of eating bread over the course of a week and a half, I started feeling this again in my stomach, and I'm
Interesting.
like I do not like this feeling at all.
Yeah.
I far prefer this, right on the edge of OMAD that I do,
Mhm.
where I won't get hungry until probably 4 o'clock this
Mhm.
afternoon,
Good.
and then probably what I will have will be something savory. I'll have a handful of olives or
Right.
some cheese or something like that. But I want to get back to what you talked about, the keeping us keto thing. I think is a huge deal. You got to have that safety net.
Mhm.
And for those of us who live in a household where we're the only keto person, and our spouse has got Cheetos and
Right.
Pepsi and
Yeah.
chocolate covered raisins, sometimes we want to be part of that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
in a way that isn't going to knock us out of ketosis.
Right. I
So
think again, I think in some ways, I don't know why you started keto, but for me, because it was a health issue and knowing I could really do some serious damage also keeps my focus more narrow. I think that if it's just a weight loss thing, people can get, like you said, they can, if I was to go back to a standard American diet, my blood sugars would be through the roof. They just would be. I mean, there'd be no controlling them, and I'd be a full blown type 2 diabetic. Um, and I think when it's just weight loss and it's just about how you look and it's not the health part of it, people can get a little lost on there and they hit their goal and then they're like, oh, well, now I can go back to, lots of other things. And for me, but I've also come to love the food. That's the thing that people don't realize. If you give it a go for a while, you get used to it. I don't crave bread or pizza anymore. Well, when pizza's baking, I'm like, oh, that smells good. But I don't crave bready things that much anymore. I'd rather have the eggs, meats, cheeses, veggies, and then some dessert.
I went keto to for the weight loss. That's where I
Okay,
started. But I stuck around for the way it made me feel.
that's
And
great.
it's one of those where um you don't realize, I bring this up a lot of times when I'm talking, what inflammation is until it
Mhm,
goes away. I
mhm,
thought this was just the process of me getting older. Like, oh,
mhm,
I hurt all the time. My knees hurt, my back hurts, my knuckles hurt. I've got
mhm,
arthritis, tendonitis, you name it,
mhm.
every itis. I grunt when I get up off the couch,
Well, I do that still.
and then when I had the epiphany, I was at a half price bookstore and I was looking at the cookbooks and I was
Mhm,
squatted down on my haunches and realized I've been squatting here for a few minutes and
and
this
it's
actually
not.
feels good. It doesn't hurt.
Oh, that's
And,
good.
like I said, once you realize what inflammation is, because it went away, it's like a hangover going away.
Mhm,
You're like, why would I ever want to give myself this hangover again?
mhm,
through through eating stuff that honestly isn't all that delicious, really. I mean, most of those things that we're giving up in keto are, in my opinion, a delivery mechanism for the really tasty stuff, for the
mhm,
cheese, the meat, the
mhm.
spices, the sauces.
I agree with you, but I was always the person who took half the bread off my sandwich anyway because I always wanted the fillings. Like if I had a Reuben, the bread was rye bread is fabulous and I loved it, but I was like, oh, it's too, there's tons of fillings here. And if I eat all the bread, I won't be able to eat the fillings. So I was always just taking off part of it and eating. I would eat some, but it wasn't about the bread part. So I think if you always started from that kind of, I mean, I ate tons of carbs previously, thought I was eating healthy. But if you start from a place of I like the meat the most, it's might be an easier transition from, say, someone who's like Italian and the pasta's the point.
Mhm. So you had mentioned that the blood sugar control. Besides that, what has been your favorite benefit or side effect of the keto lifestyle?
The muscles. Honestly, I eat a lot of protein and I was slender already. And I maybe a lot of that is working out too, but I think the muscles came on really easily because I eat protein. Protein's the main, protein and some fat and very few carbs. There's kind of the main way I eat. And I honestly like how my body looks better than I did when I was 20. I like being strong and I like having the energy to be strong because I was definitely, because of the blood sugar ups and downs, I was definitely somebody who had blood sugar drops and went and for all my life thought that I was, hypoglycemic and, no. Or which one's which? Hyperglycemic? I can't remember. Yeah,
Um,
hypoglycemic. I thought I was hypoglycemic.
okay. So you need
So
the sugar is what you thought.
yeah, I thought I needed the sugar. And so, yeah, I like like you said, I like the way my body feels at almost 50. Um, Much better than even, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, and having energy.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, I struggle. My biggest struggle is with how the mainstream media and any health air quotes source describes keto as this horrible thing that's going to clog your arteries and you're going to die of a heart attack, and so many people are bought into it that it's hard to even have a rational conversation with
Mhm.
most people about it. How do you, I mean, when you're dealing with someone, a friend, coworker, family member who thinks what you're doing is unhealthy, how do you approach it?
Smiling and nodding. I used to, sometimes present information. And I just don't get dogmatic about it anymore because it's like religion. It was a friend of mine, Judy Baker, who wrote Carb Wars and stuff. She once said to me that diets are like religion and politics.
Mm,
You're never going to change somebody's mind. You're going to end up in an argument. And she's absolutely right. I mean, just the fact that you see people, dogmatic about keto, dogmatic about veganism, dogmatic about everything. And so if somebody says, well, that's not healthy, it's not sustainable, I just, okay, I know what works for me. Thanks. Occasionally I fire back to people. It's kind of fun on social media. I had a strange comment on some sugar-free sugar cookies, and the guy was sort of making fun of me and telling me sugar was better for me. And I
mhm.
gave him some examples of why that wouldn't be the case. And he got really defensive and said I was attacking him. I was like, okay. And then he deleted the comment because, yeah, I think he felt attacked. But I wasn't. I was perfectly polite the whole time.
That can be tough. That can be awfully tough. But um, we're kind of bumping up against it
I know.
time wise. Where are the best places for people to follow you? So, and I'll make
Well,
sure that I'll link to all of them down in the description below
yeah,
so
I'd
that they
love
can.
some more YouTube followers, but
Okay.
probably the place I'm most engaged is Facebook. In terms of Facebook's the easiest place to respond to people a lot of the time, and Instagram just moves too fast. YouTube, I'd love some more followers. I try to answer a lot of comments on there too. And then on the blog, because if you're asking a question about a specific recipe, the best place to get the answer is a direct comment on the recipe itself.
Well, I will make sure to include the links to all of those
Thank
down
you.
in my description so that people can follow. And I think that's going to probably be it for this not
Great.
so serious interview.
It was fun.
It was. Thank you so much, and
Okay. Thank you.
thank you for watching.